Chapter 1. The Perfect Sunday. The soft hum of a record player filled the kitchen, blending with a warm scent of rosemary bread baking in the oven. Riv and Kaelric leaned against the doorway, coffee mug in hand, taking in the quiet beauty of the moment. Sunlight spilled across the breakfast table, catching on the glassware and casting fractured rainbows on the walls. For a rare moment, everything felt still, almost too still. Silrathane moved gracefully around the table, arranging plates and placing cutlery with her usual effortless precision. Her dark auburn hair was pinned loosely, a few strands framing her face. She looked back at him and smiled, the kind of smile that once made him lose track of entire conversations. "Daydreaming again," she teased. Riven smirked faintly, "Just wondering when we started living in a magazine spread." Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. The Thalric circle, their closest friends and neighbors, began to trickle in, bringing bottles of wine, covered dishes, and the easy laughter that turned ordinary Sundays into something worth remembering. Kaelin Drosk, their favorite waiter from the nearby cafe, had been invited as a guest this time, and he greeted them with his usual polite bow and a grin. It was a perfect afternoon. Laughter filled the air as chairs scraped across the floor and everyone squeezed around the table. Lucian Drevik, ever the storyteller, launched into an absurd tale about a disastrous boardroom meeting, and the group erupted into shared amusement. Silra's hand found Riven's for a brief moment under the table, a gentle squeeze that told him, "This is good, this is home." For the first hour, it was. Riven stepped away to refill his coffee when his phone buzzed against the countertop. Absent-mindedly, he unlocked it and froze. One message glowed on the screen. Does she know yet? No name, no context, just that single, needling question. His chest tightened. The room behind him was still full of laughter, but it suddenly sounded distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. He looked toward the table, at Silra. She was leaning toward Joran Vayner, whispering something that made him grin before they both broke into quiet laughter. Riven's grip on the mug tightened until his knuckles went white. He set the coffee pot down too carefully, his mind spinning. Who sent the message? Who was she? And what exactly was there to know? When Silra glanced toward him, he forced a smile. Casual, easy, just enough to keep her from asking questions. But behind his eyes, something had shifted. The perfect Sunday was over. The chapter closes with Riven slipping his phone back into his pocket and walking back toward the table, his expression calm but unreadable. The audience knows what he doesn't say. He has already decided he needs to know the truth, whatever it costs. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Kitchen. Riven Kaelric barely tasted the next bite of bread. The laughter around the table had returned to full volume, but it washed over him like static. That single message kept replaying in his mind, its letters seared into the back of his eyelids. Does she know yet? He forced himself to smile, nodding along as Lucian Drevik launched into another story, but every laugh felt hollow in his chest. When Silrathane excused herself to check on the dessert in the kitchen, Riven's gaze followed her, not openly, just a flicker of his eyes. Moments later, Joran Vayner pushed his chair back. "I'll give you a hand," he said casually, lifting a wine glass as he disappeared into the kitchen after her. Riven's pulse thudded once in his ears. He stayed seated for a moment, not moving, just listening. The chatter around him masked the faint sounds from the other room, clinking dishes, muffled voices. But then he heard it, Silra's low, melodic laugh, warmer and softer than the laugh she'd given anyone at the table. He excused himself, too smoothly, too calmly, and stepped toward the kitchen, keeping to the edge of the hallway. From there, he could see just enough. Silra, her back to him, reaching up for a dish on the top shelf, Joran standing just a little too close behind her. "You'll get caught one of these days," Joran murmured, just loud enough for Riven to hear. "Only if you stop covering for me," Silra replied lightly. There was a smile in her voice. The words hit Riven like a physical blow. He didn't barge in. He didn't demand answers. He turned silently, walked back to the dining table, and sat down again, his face perfectly blank. But inside, something had shifted. The rest of the brunch blurred by. He nodded at the right moments, made jokes when expected, even kissed Silra on the cheek as their guests left. But the image of her standing in the kitchen, whispering with Joran, replayed over and over, each time a little sharper, a little darker. By nightfall, when the house was finally quiet, Riven sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Silra was humming softly as she brushed her hair in the bathroom, as if nothing in the world were wrong. His phone buzzed again. No name, no greeting, just two more words. Find proof. Riven's hand tightened around the phone until the screen dimmed. He glanced toward the bathroom door. Silra was still humming. Riven stood slowly, almost mechanically, and crossed the room to his desk. From the bottom drawer, he pulled out a small, discreet audio recorder, a leftover from a past security contract. He turned it over in his hand, thumb brushing against the worn metal casing. His reflection in the dark window looked different somehow. Colder, harder. Fine, he whispered to himself. I will. He slid the recorder into his pocket and turned out the light, lying back on the bed beside Silra as though nothing had changed. But it had. When dawn came, Riven would no longer be the man who simply suspected. By the next night, he would be the man who knew. Chapter 3. The Setup. Morning light crept through the blinds, washing the room in pale gold. Riven Kaelric lay awake long before the alarm, staring at the ceiling. The recorder rested on the nightstand like a silent promise. Silra Thane stirred beside him, stretching lazily before slipping out of bed. Coffee? She asked softly, her voice still heavy with sleep. Riven smiled faintly. Please. She disappeared into the kitchen. The moment her footsteps faded down the hall, he sat up, took the recorder, and moved quickly. In the living room, he knelt by the corner of the bookshelf, the perfect spot, out of sight but with a clear angle toward the couch and kitchen doorway. He pressed the tiny switch, watching the red light blink once before going dark, entering standby mode. His hands moved with mechanical precision, but his jaw was tight. This wasn't just about finding out. This was about arming himself with the truth. Silra's voice floated from the kitchen. Did you say something? Just talking to myself, Riven replied evenly, brushing invisible dust from his hands before rejoining her at the table. The rest of the day passed in an eerie imitation of normalcy. Riven worked from his home office, his mind elsewhere, glancing at the clock every hour. By evening, he had to force himself not to pace. When Silra left to meet Talia Brook for dinner, he finally exhaled. The house was quiet. He walked straight to the bookshelf, retrieved the recorder, and pressed play. At first, it was nothing. The creak of floorboards, the clink of coffee cups, his own voice asking about invoices. Then, hours later, a new voice entered, Joran Vanas. You're reckless sometimes, Joran's low voice said, distorted slightly but clear enough. Silra's laughter followed, softer, private. That's what you like about me. Riven froze. You know he's suspicious, Joran warned. He won't do anything, Silra replied, her voice almost a whisper. He never does. There was a pause, long enough to make Riven's skin prickle. Then the sound of footsteps, closer, and a chair scraping against the floor. Still, Joran said quietly, you need to be careful. Riven stopped the recording, his thumb pressing so hard against the button it hurt. The silence in the room suddenly felt suffocating. He sat back on the couch, staring at nothing for several minutes. This wasn't definitive proof, not yet, but it was enough to shatter any illusions he had left. When the front door clicked open later, Silra called out cheerfully, I'm back. Riven stewed, slipping the recorder into his pocket, his face unreadable. How was dinner? He asked casually. Good, she replied, stepping closer and kissing him lightly. Missed you. He smiled back. I missed you too. But as she walked past him, Riven's expression darkened, just for a moment. He would keep the recorder running. He would keep waiting. And next time, he told himself, there would be no ambiguity. Chapter 4. Late Night Suspicion. Riven Kaelric couldn't sleep. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood. Silra Thane's steady breathing beside him should have been comforting, but it only made the storm inside his chest louder. At 1:47 a.m., he slipped out of bed. He moved like a shadow through the darkened hallway, careful not to wake her. His bare feet made no sound as he reached the living room. He crouched by the bookshelf, pulled the recorder out from its hiding place, and pressed play. The device whirred softly before coming to life. The first hour of the day was routine: footsteps, doors closing, his own voice. Then, around mid-afternoon, Joran Vayner's voice appeared again. "You didn't answer my call," Joran said. "I was with him," Silra replied softly, almost guiltily. There was the faint sound of liquid being poured, then a low chuckle from Joran. "You're getting bolder." "Maybe I like the risk," Silra murmured. Riven's stomach turned. Then came silence, not long, but long enough to feel deliberate, before Joran spoke again. "If he ever finds out." "He won't," Silra said, her tone sharp, as if cutting the thought short. Riven hit stop, his thumb trembling just slightly. He stared into the dark, the soft red glow of the recorder's light casting a faint reflection on the glass coffee table. This wasn't flirting anymore. This was admission. When he returned to bed, Silra shifted and reached for him in her sleep, her hand brushing against his arm. He stayed still, staring at the ceiling, his expression carved from stone. The next day, he went through the motions, made breakfast, answered emails, even joked with Lucian Drevik when he called to discuss work. But underneath the calm exterior, a plan was forming. By evening, the tension had begun to gnaw at him again. He watched Silra from the kitchen doorway as she chopped vegetables, her hair pulled back, humming softly. It was almost cruel how ordinary she looked, how domestic and warm the scene was, as if nothing in their world had shifted. When her phone buzzed on the counter, Riven's gaze flicked toward it. Silra was at the stove, stirring something. The screen lit up just long enough for him to read the preview. "Joran Vayner, tonight." Riven's jaw clenched. He turned away before she saw him looking. That night, when Silra claimed she was going for a late run to clear her head, Riven stayed seated on the couch, pretending to watch television. The moment the front door closed, he stood and checked the recorder again. But this time, he didn't just place it in the living room. He slid a second recorder, an even smaller one, under the edge of the hallway table near the front door. When Silra returned later, breathless and smiling faintly, he didn't ask questions. He waited until she fell asleep. Then he retrieved the new recorder, sat at his desk in the dark, and pressed play. The device crackled, then captured the faint sound of the door opening, footsteps, and Silra's soft voice. "Are you sure he's asleep?" Joran's voice followed, low and close. "I checked. Let's make it quick." There was a pause, then the unmistakable sound of the door clicking shut from the inside. Riven's pulse hammered in his ears. He sat frozen, staring at the recorder as if it might bend through the desk. When the playback ended, he rewound it and listened again. And again. By the fourth time, his breathing had slowed. His expression was no longer one of shock, but cold resolve. He knew now. The next step wouldn't just be recording. It would be confrontation. Chapter 5, The Setup. The morning after the late-night recording, Riven Kaelric stood at the kitchen counter, staring into his untouched coffee. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Silra Thane came in, yawning, and pressed a quick kiss to his shoulder before heading toward the pantry. "Everything okay?" she asked casually. "Yeah," Riven said smoothly, forcing a small smile. "Just thinking about work." She nodded, accepting it without question, and moved on. But Riven wasn't thinking about work. By the time she left for her design consultation that afternoon, he was already moving through the house with quiet precision, as though he had rehearsed this 100 times. He retrieved the recorder from the bookshelf and set it aside. Then he began methodically placing new devices, not just one, but 3. A small recorder beneath the couch cushion where Silra liked to sit. Another hidden near the kitchen doorway, angled toward the counter. The last one tucked behind the frame of the hallway mirror, its tiny lens almost invisible in the reflection. When he was finished, he stood in the center of the room, staring at the house around him. It looked the same as always, warm, inviting, full of quiet domestic life. But now it was wired, every corner listening, waiting. The rest of the day he forced himself into routine. Answered emails, took calls, Even joked with Lucian Drevik over a project timeline, though his voice felt distant, hollow. By late evening, he was sitting on the couch when Silra came back through the door, carrying a bag of groceries. "You're home early," she said, sounding surprised. "Wanted to have dinner with you," Riven replied easily. They cooked together, laughed at something on the radio, shared a bottle of wine. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were the picture of a happy couple. But Riven's mind was elsewhere. When Silra fell asleep later, he quietly slipped out of bed, collected the recorders, and sat down at his desk. The first hour of audio was nothing. Then came Joran Vayner's voice. "Storm's coming tomorrow night," Joran said. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Silra replied, her tone light. But there was something in it, something Riven couldn't ignore. There was movement, the faint sound of footsteps, a chair scraping, then a soft exhale that sounded too close to the microphone. "We shouldn't," Joran murmured. "We already have," Silra whispered. Riven stopped the playback, staring at the wall. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't even just emotional betrayal. This was confirmation, and it was enough. But Riven didn't smash the recorder. He didn't storm into the bedroom and demand answers. He sat back in the chair, his expression calm, controlled, and began to plan. Tomorrow night, the storm would come. And with it, so would the truth. He opened his laptop and began drafting a short, cryptic message, an invitation for a dinner the following evening. He sent it to Silra, to Joran, and to the Thalric circle. When the last message was sent, he closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared into the darkness. This time, there would be no escaping what was coming. Chapter 6. The Recording. The storm arrived right on time. Wind howled through the trees outside, rain lashing against the windows like thrown pebbles. Lightning flared white across the sky, casting quick, harsh shadows through the living room. Riven Kaelric sat quietly on the couch, a book open in his hands but unread. Across the room, Silra Thane stood by the window, watching the storm with a faint smile. "This one's bad," she murmured. "Yeah," Riven replied, his voice even, calm. "Roads might flood." As if on cue, headlights appeared outside Joran Vayner's truck. It pulled into the driveway, wipers slashing back and forth against the downpour. When the knock came, Silra moved quickly to answer it, her expression neutral but her steps too hurried for Riven's liking. Joran stepped inside, soaked through, water dripping from his hair and jacket. "Roads washed out past the bridge," he said. "Figured I'd wait it out here if that's okay." "Of course," Silra said smoothly, already reaching for a towel. Riven stood, offering a polite nod. "You can stay in the guest room if you need to." Joran glanced at him, searching his face for something, then nodded. "Thanks." The rest of the evening passed in quiet tension. The three of them sat together, drinking tea as thunder rolled overhead. Joran and Silra talked softly at intervals, laughing once or twice, but Riven barely spoke. When it grew late, Riven excused himself, claiming he was exhausted. "Good night," he said simply, his tone betraying nothing. He left them in the living room, his footsteps fading down the hall. But he didn't sleep. Instead, he lay still in the dark, listening. The house creaked under the weight of wind and rain. For a long time there was nothing but the occasional rumble of thunder. Then, faint voices, too low to make out. Riven slid silently out of bed, padded to the hallway, and crouched just beyond view of the living room. Joran's voice, closer now. "We shouldn't do this while he's here." Silra's reply, quiet but unmistakable, "He's asleep. He won't wake up." There was a pause, then the soft sound of fabric brushing fabric, followed by the wet sound of a kiss. Riven's hands curled into fists, nails biting into his palms. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He waited. The sounds grew clearer, a muffled laugh, a gasp, the couch creaking softly under shifting weight. It was enough, more than enough. He turned and walked back to the bedroom, his face expressionless. When the house finally fell silent, he retrieved the recorder he'd placed under the couch earlier. His fingers trembled slightly as he pressed play. The device captured everything. Every word, every laugh, every sound that left no doubt. When the recording ended, Riven sat in the dark, the red light of the recorder reflecting in his eyes. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside him there was only a cold, perfect calm. Tomorrow, he would no longer simply observe. Tomorrow, he would act. Chapter 7. The Calm Before the Storm. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming. Sunlight glinted off puddles in the driveway, but inside the Kaelrick home, the air was unnervingly still. Revenge Kaelrick stood at the sink, rinsing a coffee mug, his movements slow, deliberate. The events of the night before echoed in his mind, but his expression remained calm, too calm. Silrathane came in, her hair still damp from a shower. "You were quiet last night," she said softly. "Long day," Riven replied, offering a small, weary smile. "I'll be fine." She nodded, studying him for a moment before turning to pour her own coffee. By mid-morning, Joran Vayner left, claiming he needed to check the damage near his truck. Riven stood by the window, watching him go, hands tucked into his pockets. When Silra wasn't looking, Riven's gaze hardened. He spent the afternoon moving with careful precision. He transferred the previous night's recording to his laptop, clipping out only the relevant minutes. The voices were clear, undeniable. The creak of the couch, the whispered words, all perfectly audible. He tested the speakers once, hearing Silra's laugh play through the room. His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. When Silra returned from running errands, Riven was in the kitchen, pretending to review emails. "Thinking of inviting everyone over tonight," he said casually. "Tonight?" Silra blinked, surprised. "Yeah," he said, turning with a small shrug. "Storm's past. Good excuse to have everyone together." She hesitated for half a second, just long enough for Riven to notice, before nodding. "Sure, I'll make something light." Within the hour, messages went out. To Lucian Drevik, casual and friendly, "Dinner tonight. Bring wine." To Kalen Drosk, "Your favorite table is open. Come by." To the Thalric Circle, "Gathering tonight. No excuses." And finally, to Joran, "Hope you can make it." Each message was polite, even warm. There was no hint of accusation, no sign of the storm building beneath the surface. When evening came, Riven dressed neatly, choosing a dark shirt and watch. His reflection in the mirror was steady, unreadable. Silra floated through the kitchen, arranging appetizers, her smile bright and practiced. "You seem different today," she said, glancing at him. Riven returned the smile. "Just glad everyone's coming." As the first knock sounded on the door, Riven glanced at his laptop on the dining table. The file was queued, the volume adjusted, the single clip ready to play with one tap. He drew in a slow breath, letting it fill his lungs, steadying his pulse. Tonight, there would be no secrets left in this house. He opened the door. Lucian and the first of the Thalric Circle stepped inside, shaking off the last traces of rain. "Feels like the storm never happened," Lucian said cheerfully. Riven smiled faintly, stepping back to let them in. "Oh," he said quietly, almost to himself, "it's still here." Chapter 8. The Public Reveal. The dining table was alive with chatter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of background music. Candles flickered, casting warm, golden light over smiling faces. To anyone watching from the outside, it was a picture-perfect evening. Riven Kaelrick sat at the head of the table, quiet but composed. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of his laptop under the table, hidden from view. Silrathane moved around gracefully, topping off glasses and laughing at Lucian Drevik's latest joke. Joran Vayner sat across from her, relaxed, leaning back in his chair, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. The Thalric Circle passed dishes, traded stories, and filled the room with warmth. Everything looked normal, until Riven tapped the spacebar. The room went silent as the speakers crackled to life. At first, it was just ambient noise, the creak of the couch, faint footsteps. Then, unmistakably, Joran's voice. "We shouldn't do this while he's here." Silra's laugh followed, low and intimate. "He's asleep. He won't wake up." The sound of a kiss filled the room. The air changed instantly. The laughter died. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Someone gasped softly. Silra froze, her wine glass trembling in her hand. "Riven," she said, her voice thin. "Turn that off." He didn't. The recording continued. Whispers, soft sounds, the creak of the couch, until the final silence fell. When Riven finally hit stop, the room was so quiet that the faint hiss of the speakers felt deafening. Silra's face had gone pale. She set her glass down with care, her fingers shaking. "This isn't what it sounds like," she said quickly, her voice too high, too defensive. Riven looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's exactly what it sounds like." Joran shifted uncomfortably, his alien grin gone. "You had no right," he began. Riven's gaze cut to him like a blade. "No right." His voice was calm, almost eerily so. "In my house." No one spoke. Even Lucian, normally quick with words, stayed silent, his jaw tight. Silra's best friend Talia Brooke had tears in her eyes, one hand covering her mouth. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Silra reached for Riven's hand, but he pulled back. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "We can talk about this." "We just did," Riven said quietly. He stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "I invited you all here," he said, his eyes sweeping over the table, "because I wanted witnesses. I wanted no one to doubt what happened." Silra's breath caught, her face crumpling. "Riven." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a slim manila envelope on the table in front of her. The room seemed to shrink around them. "What is this?" Silra whispered, staring at it as if it might bite her. "Open it," Riven said. Her fingers trembled as she slid the papers out. The color drained from her face as she realized what she was holding. Divorce papers. A single tear slipped down her cheek, splashing onto the first page. Riven turned toward the door, his movements calm, measured. "I won't raise my voice," he said quietly. "I won't break anything. I won't scream. This is the last time we'll ever sit at this table together." And with that, he left the room. No one moved. The front door clicked shut. Only then did Silra collapse into her chair, burying her face in her hands as the candles flickered, the lights suddenly feeling cold. Chapter 9. The Fallout. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a gunshot. No one moved at first. The only sound was the faint hiss of the candles and the distant rumble of thunder still trailing off beyond the horizon. Then Joran Vayner shoved his chair back, the legs scraping across the floor. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, his voice sharp. "He set us up." "You set yourself up," Talia Brooke snapped from across the table, her voice shaking with anger. "You think any of us wanted to hear that?" Joran's jaw clenched, his eyes flashing. "This isn't your business." Lucian Drevik stewed slowly, his expression hard. "It became our business when he played it in front of all of us," he said quietly. The Thalric circle murmured their agreement, their earlier warmth replaced by something cold, judgmental. Silra Thane sat frozen, the divorce papers still in her hands. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath coming in short bursts. He didn't even let me explain," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Talia slammed her hand against the table, startling everyone. "Explain," she cried. "We all heard it, Silra. We heard everything." Silra's shoulders shook as she tried to speak, but no words came. Joran grabbed his jacket, his face twisted with frustration. "You deal with your husband," he spat, glaring at Silra before storming out the door. The silence he left behind was deafening. One by one, the Thalric circle began gathering their things, their expressions ranging from pity to quiet disgust. Lucian was the last to leave, pausing just long enough to put a hand on Silra's shoulder. "Fix this," he said simply, before following the others out into the night. When the house finally fell quiet, Silra sat alone at the table, the untouched wine and half-eaten food in front of her like a mockery of what had just happened. Her shaking fingers reached for her phone. She dialed Riven's number. It rang once, twice, then straight to voicemail. "Riven, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't do this. We can talk. We can fix this. Just come home." She ended the call and tried again, straight to voicemail. By midnight, the candles had burned low, leaving the house in darkness. Silra paced the living room, tears streaming down her face, every creak of the house making her spin toward the door, hoping it would open. It didn't. At 2 a.m., she sat on the floor by the couch, clutching the recorder Riven had left behind, as if it were the last piece of him she still had. The red light blinked once before going dark. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, until it beat against the windows like restless fingers. Silra pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face in her hands. Somewhere in the city, Riven was awake too. But unlike her, he wasn't breaking. He was planning the next move. Chapter 10. The Breaking Point. Riven Kaelric drove through the empty city streets, the wipers rhythmically clearing the rain from his windshield. The storm had passed, but the roads still gleamed with reflections of streetlights, fractured and distorted. He wasn't going home. Not tonight. Instead, he parked outside a small office building with darkened windows. His lawyer's office. He sat there for a moment, staring at the manila envelope on the passenger seat, the extra copy of the divorce papers, before stepping out into the wet night. Inside, the building was quiet, but the security guard recognized him and nodded him through. Riven made his way up to the second floor, where his attorney, Halen Myrick, was waiting. "You're early," Halen said, glancing at the clock. "I don't sleep much anymore," Riven replied flatly. Halen gestured for him to sit. "You're sure about this? There's no going back once we file." Riven leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I was sure the moment I hit play." Halen studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll move fast. If she contests, we're prepared. If she doesn't, she will," Riven interrupted quietly. "But it won't matter." When the paperwork was finalized, Riven left the office with a strange calm settling over him. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was a step towards something final. Across town, Silrathane sat in the darkened living room, her phone clutched in her hand, her eyes red from crying. She had called Riven's number 12 times since he left. Every call went straight to voicemail. She left messages, pleading ones, angry ones, quiet ones where she barely spoke at all, but there was no reply. By dawn, her desperation turned into action. She showered quickly, changed clothes, and drove to Riven's office, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. When she arrived, his colleagues from the Thalric Circle were just beginning to file in for the morning. They looked at her with a mix of pity and unease. "Is he here?" she asked, her voice raw. Lucian Drevik shook his head. "He's not coming in today." "Do you know where he is?" Lucian hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe you should give him time." "I don't have time," Silra snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness in her voice. She left the building, her chest tight, and drove aimlessly through the city until she found herself parked outside the cafe where she and Joran had first met. The sight of it made her stomach twist. Her phone buzzed. For one hopeful, heart-stopping second, she thought it was Riven. It wasn't. It was a message from Joran. "We need to talk." Silra stayed at the screen, torn between rage and panic. She deleted the message without replying. By evening, she was back home, pacing the living room, waiting for headlights that never came. Then, just as she sank onto the couch, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Riven. One message. "Be ready to sign." No greeting, no explanation, no emotion. Silra's heart pounded in her chest. She typed back with trembling hands. "Please, just talk to me. Please." No reply came. She threw the phone aside and broke down, her sobs echoing through the empty house. Meanwhile, across town, Riven sat alone in a dimly lit diner, staring at the divorce documents in his hands. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow, it would all be official. But something deep in his gut told him Silra wouldn't let it end so easily. And he was right. Chapter 11. The Confrontation. Morning came heavy and gray, the kind of sky that pressed down on the city like a weight. Silrathane sat in the driver's seat outside Riven Kaelric's lawyer's office, her hands locked around the steering wheel. She had been there for nearly an hour, waiting. When Riven finally appeared, stepping out of his car with the manila envelope tucked under his arm, her heart lurched. She was out of her car before she could think, slamming the door so hard it echoed through the empty parking lot. "Riven," she called, her voice ragged. He froze for half a second, then turned slowly. His expression was calm, too calm, but his eyes were colder than she had ever seen them. "What are you doing here?" he asked evenly. "You won't answer my calls," Silra said, her breath coming fast. "You won't even look at me." "There's nothing left to say." "Yes, there is," she cried, stepping closer. "You can't just walk away from 5 years of marriage like it meant nothing." Riven's jaw tightened. "You walked away first." The words hit her like a physical blow. She reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "I was stupid and selfish and—" "You were careful," Riven cut in, his tone sharp. "You planned it. You laughed about it. You did it in my house while I was asleep. Don't call that a mistake." Tears spilled down Silra's cheeks, hot and unrelenting. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. Riven's face twisted, just for a moment, before he mastered himself. "You don't get to say that," he said quietly. "Not after what you did." She shook her head violently, desperate. "Then hate me. Yell at me. Break something. Just don't." Her voice cracked. "Don't leave me like this." But Riven didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He simply opened the envelope and held the papers out to her. "Sign them," he said, "and maybe, someday, we'll both stop bleeding." Silra's hands trembled as she stared at the papers. The rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, until it plastered her hair to her face. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Riven said, "because you have to." He turned and started toward the building, leaving her standing in the rain. "Riven," she shouted after him. He stopped but didn't turn. "You think this will fix you?" she cried. "You think this will make it hurt less?" "No," he said quietly, "but it will make it stop." He walked inside without looking back, the glass door closing softly behind him. Silra stood in the rain until she couldn't feel her fingers, her tears indistinguishable from the water streaming down her face. When she finally got back into her car, her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Joran Vayner. "He's really leaving you, isn't he?" Silra stayed at the screen for a long, long time. Then she typed back, "Meet me tonight. We're ending this, all of it." Chapter 12, The Cold Goodbye. Night had fallen by the time Silra Thane pulled up outside Joran Vayner's workshop. The place was quiet, the storm from earlier leaving the ground wet and glistening under the streetlights. She sat in the car for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel until her fingers ached. When she finally stepped out, the cool air hit her, carrying the metallic tang of wet asphalt. Joran was already waiting by the door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "You actually came," he said, his tone unreadable. "This ends tonight," Silra said quietly. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine by me." Inside, the workshop smelled of sawdust and rain-soaked earth. The only light came from a single hanging bulb overhead, casting long shadows across the floor. Silra stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "You think running back to him will fix this?" Joran asked, stepping closer. "I'm not running back," she said. "I'm letting go." Joran's expression hardened. "So you destroy what we had and then just walk away?" Silra flinched at the edge in his voice. "What we had was never real," she said, her tone low but steady. "I was trying to fill something that was missing, and I broke everything that mattered instead." Before Joran could respond, the workshop door creaked open. Both of them turned. Riven Kaelric stood in the doorway, rain dripping from the shoulders of his coat. His expression was unreadable, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Riven," Silra started, her heart in her throat. He held up a hand, silencing her. "I'm not here to fight," he said evenly, "or to listen to excuses." He stepped inside, his boots leaving wet prints on the concrete floor. "I came to tell you," he continued, his gaze fixed on Silra, "that the papers are filed. This chapter is over." Silra's breath hitched. "Please," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't leave like this." Riven's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "I already left," he said. That night you thought I was asleep. The words hit harder than any shout could have. He turned to Joran next, his stare cold and unwavering. You stay away from her, he said. Whatever happens next, she'll deal with it without you. Joran said nothing, just stepped back, his mouth a hard line. Riven looked at Silra one last time, and for a flicker of a second, something softer passed through his eyes. Grief, perhaps, or the memory of who they used to be. Then it was gone. He turned and walked out into the rain without another word. Silra followed him to the doorway, her bare feet soaking in the puddles, watching as he crossed the lot and climbed into his car. He didn't look back. The engine started, the taillights glowed red against the wet pavement, and then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Silra stood there long after the sound of the engine faded, the rain soaking her hair and clothes until she could no longer tell where the storm ended and she began. When she finally stepped back inside, Joran was gone too. The workshop was empty, silent except for the steady drip of rain from the roof. She sank to her knees, the divorce papers still clutched in her hand, her tears mixing with the water on the floor. For the first time, she understood what Riven had meant. This chapter was over, and there was no going back.